to 3 minutes unless otherwise specified by the board. Participants must be recognized by the presiding officer and note their name and municipality. All statements shall be directed to the presiding officer rather than to individual board members, district employees, or members of the public. The speaker may speak once during each comment period. Please note that these sessions are designated for comments to protect the confidentiality, privacy rights of all of our members of our community. The board encourages members of the public to direct any comments regarding particular individuals, such as students or district employees, privately to the superintendent or other appropriate administrators, or to board members, or to communicate with the board and superintendent privately by sending an email to psdschoolboard@pennridge.org. Questions raised and not addressed may be followed up at a later time. On the sign-up sheet, I see only one name. That's Mr. Rajan. If you would come to the podium,
Sure.
Give us your name and municipality, and you have 3 minutes.
Yeah, I'll put my name is Alex Rajan. I'm from Bedminster Township, and my concern, my two boys go to Pennridge. My concern is school safety, and my concern comes from a unique perspective. I went to school at Brooklyn, grew up in Brooklyn in grammar school years, so I'm used to seeing police officers in schools. That's a normal thing over there. So I do believe in hardening of the school, that you need to have that. But I also believe we live in a different environment. This is not Brooklyn. In Brooklyn, we don't have gun shops next door to me like I do have today. So we have different situations in this area versus what I've seen in Brooklyn. So I'm interested in hearing more about that. More importantly, what these officers have and that you're planning to talk about. What other tools and abilities are you going to give them besides just being law officers? Because they will be presented with a lot of different issues besides just law enforcement. There might be kids with having several different issues. I mean, I worked as a security guard at Boston University. I had to deal with police officers in various situations. It could be a personal issue. It could be a law enforcement issue. So besides, and you got to have the right type of law enforcement for a school for kids. So that's my concern. Also, just adding police is not the answer. That's a start, but we also have to look at the environment that the school is running in. I went to school in 2 cities, Brooklyn, Boston. They were mostly city-surrounded areas, and we had different needs there. So I don't know if the same needs will work here, but I am concerned. I want to just make sure you're addressing those concerns. I think I'm under my time.
Thank you. Anyone else care to comment before we start the meeting? Hearing and seeing none, we'll move on to the proposed personnel recommendations for the 2019-20 school year. There are 5 of these. I believe, Dr. Bolton, you're going to address them.
I am. I do want to report that Ms. Kildare is under the weather, and so she is on phone right here in front of me. So she is not attending the meeting, which I think we all appreciate Ms. Kildare from a health standpoint. But if you have any questions or comments, just go ahead and either speak up or text in, and we'll make availability for that. I am going to do the agenda out of order. Mr. Miller, who is our school solicitor, is working with another school board this evening, and he's available at 7 o'clock. And so we're going to call him in on the matter of the school police officer to be able to explain some of the legalities of it and if there are questions. And so he's not available until 7 o'clock, so I'm just going to do the other 4 items, and hopefully they'll take 24 minutes, and we'll be ready to go from that standpoint.
Dr. Bolton, could I just take a moment, excuse me?
Sure.
If anyone would like to follow along with the job descriptions, they are attached to the personnel report agenda for all of the job descriptions.
Awesome.
That you'll be covering.
Thank you.
Okay.
As is, a copy of the presentation was up at the podium, or the sign-in sheet. So if you didn't get a copy of my presentation, hopefully we're trying out a new flat screen, and so we're going to see how we do in terms of clarity. We tried to make the font a little bigger, so we'll see if we can read it from the back. But if not, there are paper copies up there, as well as loaded in the agenda. In board docs. So these are not, I hesitated calling this personnel recommendations because they are in fact personnel recommendations, but I want to be clear that these are not all of the personnel recommendations for next year. As part of the budget process, there is a process we go through that we react to student need. And so the students are in the process of requesting courses. We then take that information and build our master schedule based on those requests. And so that could either increase or decrease staffing in different departments. And as part of the normal budget process over the next few months, there could be additional personnel reports that come before this committee as well as for board approval and action at different meetings. These personnel recommendations that I'm talking about tonight are based on our current budget. This year's budget had some positions factored into it that have not been fully utilized during the school year. And so one of the things the board had asked me when I was hired and came in was to look at some of these areas. And so I have some numbers in here in terms of costs and savings, and we'll talk about how that relates to the current budget and those pieces. So there could be other pieces that we talk about. The first one is a direct relationship to our curriculum and our support for teachers. One of the things that I believe strongly in is that one of the most important things we can do after the safety and security of our students and our staff is to provide a solid curriculum as well as support the classroom teachers. They are the ones who day in, day out are the first line of almost everything we do in a school district. And so this first recommendation, these two recommendations, are geared to provide more frontline direct support to teachers on district initiatives. And so first they talk about reducing the curriculum supervisors. Currently we have 6 curriculum supervisors. We have 4 at the secondary level. They're in what would be called the major content areas of English, math, science, and social studies. We also have 2 elementary supervisors currently. One is in the STEM areas of math and science. The other one is in the humanities, which is routinely called RELA, or Reading English Language Arts, and social studies. My recommendation is that we take those 6 positions and that we reduce them to 4, and that we move to a K-12 model in the 4 content areas, in the areas of Reading English Language Arts, or RELA, math, science, and social studies. So the job descriptions that are attached and were provided really take the current work that's being done by our supervisors at both levels and talks about how to combine those. When you look at the job description, the main differences you'll see is obviously the K-12 focus, right? So instead of an elementary and a secondary, it's K-12, which will provide better vertical articulation of our curriculum as well as our initiatives district-wide as we're working with teachers, as well as increased curriculum responsibility and professional development. These will be the 4 men and women who, if there is a science initiative, will be the front line of developing that curriculum, that initiative, as well as planning, designing, and in some cases implementing the professional development. Based on our current supervisors and their average salary, if you cut 2 of those positions, it is a savings of approximately $323,000 from that standpoint. What I'm then suggesting is that we add 3 instructional coaches. These instructional coaches would be teachers. Routinely you'll hear them called teachers on special assignment, but they would be teachers. One would be for the elementary levels, K through 5. The second one would be at the secondary level, grades 6 through 12. And their primary responsibility would be classroom support. They would be charged each year at looking at district initiatives as well as building initiatives, and then providing that support and consistency across our classrooms. They would also be utilized for a new teacher. They could be utilized for a struggling teacher, to be able to be in a classroom while they're doing it, or to model lessons and to show them an effective way of doing it. The third instructional coach is one that I'm asking the board to consider for a 3-year position only. Over the next 3 years, we are making significant strides in the elementary literacy. Both our writing and reading programs will be brand new and implemented by the end of the 3 years. Elementary, especially primary literacy, is the foundation of everything we do. There's lots of studies that will indicate that how a student is performing at the end of 3rd grade from a reading standpoint has a lot to do with future success. And that's not the only thing we're going to be measured off of, but I think it is one of the areas that we need to be very deliberate about as we're providing support to our teachers as well as then for the students. And so I'm suggesting that there be the 3rd instructional coach that would be solely for elementary literacy. It would be somebody who would work K through 5. And would be charged with helping teachers as we bring in the new writing and reading programs at the elementary level. At the end of 3 years, I suggest that we evaluate that, and then at this point we could say, well, do we need that position or not? That person will be hired knowing that at the end of 3 years, their instructional coach days are then over from that term, and they would return to the classroom. at the end of those 3 years. The other 2 are what I'm suggesting to be permanent positions. They still would be teachers, and so if we did change that in the future, they would go back to the classroom, but there would not be a plan to do that on a time standpoint, that they would be elementary and secondary. Those costs for those 3 people is approximately $240,000. It obviously would reduce by about $80,000 in year 4 if we did not continue the 3rd instructional coach. But for the sake of the numbers that I'm presenting, I use the full cost because I'm only looking at a 1-year budget impact from that standpoint. I'm going to pause at that point to see if there are any questions from the board in terms of clarification.
Your assumption about the 3 instructional coaches is an assumption that does not mean that they would be long-term teachers at the top of the salary scale, obviously.
The actual assumption is that their replacements would not be long-term at the top of it.
Okay.
Because I'm assuming that all, if not most of them,
That's
will be
where I would
internal
think they'd come
candidates.
from.
But if I pull Mr. Kraus out of the classroom, his number's already in the budget. It's his replacement I need to budget for, and his replacement is likely to be someone at the bottom end of the scale. We actually use the current average starting salary from this year in terms of all the people that came in, and that's benefits, that's everything factored in there, and it's about $80,000 per teacher, obviously, as you do that math. And so it's for the replacement that we're budgeting, not for the teachers themselves, because their budget, their salary's already in the budget, wherever they're working. We are currently working on job descriptions. Instructional coaches is something new for Pennridge, so we don't currently have a working job description, so that's why one is not attached. We are working on that. We've talked to other school districts that have some model of this, and Dr. Scheid is currently taking the best of all of those worlds to put together something that we can then present for the board's consideration at a future meeting. All right, but that's why that is not there yet, because we're just not ready in terms of that piece. Okay. Second recommendations, the top one might seem like it doesn't actually add teacher support, but it really does. Currently at the elementary level, I think it's safe to say that almost all teachers, but all classroom teachers during the lunch recess time have duties multiple times a week. So they're currently doing anywhere from 2 to 4 days worth of duties where they will either monitor the cafeteria or more often it's the recess yard with some aides that are there. My recommendation is that we free the teachers as best we can from that responsibility and allow them to do the things that they are trained for that I think will better benefit students and provide the supervision piece that is still necessary. We do need bodies to supervise lunch and cafeteria. Some schools get pairs to volunteer, some do not. Some get them on nice days, some don't get them on the days that aren't so nice outside. And I understand all of that. And so the recommendation, currently there are 2 at every building. The recommendation is that we add an additional 2 to every building. We take that from 2 to 4. The cost of the 2 right now is $67,000 annually. That's the annual cost for those 14 positions. They work 2 hours a day. So these are very, very part-time positions. They are often people who either are people who are working from home or are stay-at-home parents, or they have other jobs in the district that are part-time at the beginning and the end of the day. And so they piecemeal those things together. It would free the teachers up for increased collaboration. It would allow them to participate more often in data meetings, which is something that Dr. Scheid's office is stressing more completely over the last couple of years, as well as enrichment and remediation pieces. As we've talked about with the principals what this time could be used for, they are very excited in terms of what this could mean for their teachers and availability. Right? This is not increased free time. Right? This is increased time for them to do work outside of their classroom teaching responsibility that, that they can have during the day when they're all off at the same time, which is really, really important from a grade level standpoint. For the 4th grade teachers to be able to get together is really, really important over the course of the day. And so that would allow for that from that standpoint. The next 2 recommendations are related. If you remember last year, there was an elementary scheduling committee that made a recommendation regarding the 5th special. Currently at the elementary level, there are 4 specials, and the 5th special is done by the teacher and it's computer time. So that looks a little different in every building, but primarily that's the 5th special. The recommendation from that scheduling committee was to move to a schedule where all the specials are the same length. Currently they're not. The contract was very interesting in terms of length of time and the specials that were offered. And they would be moving to 45-minute specials, whether it be art or library or health PE or music. They're the 4 that are currently in place, as well as then introducing a 5th special. The recommendation from the committee at the initial was to have a split 5th special that was half-time STEM. Students would do STEM activities, and the other half would be exploratory Spanish. So there were 2 teachers for STEM and 2 teachers for Spanish. They would do half a year, and then the kids would get the other one, and it would be different orders and things like that. We've had conversation with the elementary scheduling committee in terms of the research on exploratory Spanish programs at the elementary level. The research on almost any exploratory special, whether it be Spanish or anything else, is that if it's not a continual cycle, the students do not benefit to the same level. But especially as it relates to world language, the research is clear that immersion programs do have impact. Exploratory programs, unless they are started as early as age 2 or 3, do not have the level of impact once students get to middle school and get into art programs. And so based on that and based on the success of our middle school and high school STEM programs, we went back to the committee and asked them as to whether they would consider the recommendation that instead of that design, that we do a full-time STEM program. Dr. Scheid worked with that committee. There were 24 members. She surveyed all of them. We were supposed to meet on one of the weather days, so we ended up doing it electronically. She surveyed all of them, and overwhelmingly the report back from that group was that they were in favor of this support, that they felt like it was important to provide something full-time. That was one of the questions we asked, and they agreed with that they would want to do something full-time instead of 2 things half-time. Given the choice between STEM and Spanish, it was a 22-2 vote. Correct me if I'm wrong, I believe I'm doing it off memory. It was a 22-2 vote that STEM be the area that we recommend. And so they were comfortable with us moving forward with that. My promise, and out of respect for that committee that did that work, as well as the conversation that preceded me around world language, is that I do want to spend some time investigating what a possible immersion program might look like at the elementary level. There are complications from certification to where do you offer it. It is an elite program, right? So there are things that need to be discussed, but it is something that the committee talked about last year, and I don't want that to die, but I also don't want to wait until we're done that work to make this decision. And so the recommendation is to utilize those positions that are already in the budget and provide a full-time STEM program. Another thing that coordinates then with the next recommendation, and one thing that I believe very strongly, is that where possible, we should have full-time employees in our buildings. Right? Right now, we are currently paying some specialists to drive in the district, which I understand why we're doing that. That's an efficient use of your time, but it does not benefit the students fully. They're not fully using their time in front of kids because they have to drive from that standpoint. And so we currently have a gifted model where there are 4.4 gifted teachers at the elementary level, 4 full-time and 1 that's split at the middle level. She's part gifted and part English teacher. My recommendation is to combine those 2 programs, to combine the gifted and the STEM program, and to turn them into 1 full-time teacher at each elementary school. So the 4.4 would become 7, so it's an increase of 2.6. So we'll talk about why that means we save money in just a second, because that's a little confusing. But I do want to say out loud, and I will say this every time we have this conversation, because I know the first concern will be, what does that mean for gifted? And the answer is absolutely nothing. There will be no change to the gifted model. The current gifted model has some push-in and some pull-out. The new gifted model, or the gifted model next year, will have some push-in and some pull-out to the same levels. There are numbers there. It actually, this recommendation increases the amount of time. What I did was I had somebody help me, and we mock scheduled 2 buildings. We mock scheduled a very normal building. Most of our elementary schools have 3 of everything. They have 3 first grade, 3 second grade, 3 third grade. That's very normal. And so we mocked that out. What would it look like under this model? We then took our building that was our largest, which also has our largest gifted population, which makes some sense, to see what would that mean there, because there's more need for gifted services in that building. In both models, the amount of time available beyond these 2 specials for enrichment and extra push-in time and consultation increased because the person was there full-time, besides the benefit of being there full-time. In the large building, it was 15 minutes a day or 75 minutes over the course of the week. At the small building, it was 30 to 40 minutes, depending on how small your building was, a day, which meant more than 2 hours, 2.5, almost 3 hours in those buildings of extra time where this person could dedicate to the buildings. I want to show you a model of that. And this may not make total sense to you, but if I explain the colors, I think it might be helpful. The colors, if you look at the blue are the new STEM classes. And so this is a building that has 3 of every section, so you can see across what I would call second period, which is really that second time slot up there. The 3 third grade classes are all getting their STEM special. Now, there's nothing magical about the days. It might be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, because the building would have that flexibility. But each teacher in 3rd grade would get their STEM at some point during that. So you can see that there are 15 dark blue STEM boxes up there. This is not going to be a special for kindergarten. And so there is not kindergarten up there in blue. This is grades 1 through 5, which is consistent with most of our specials currently at the elementary level. The light green, which are all marked seminar, are the current pull-out models. So that's when our current gifted students get their pull-out and go and get their gifted curriculum from the gifted teacher. That is the amount of time. It's different per grade level how much time they get. That's why when you add it up, it's not all the same minutes. Sometimes it's a 30-minute block, sometimes it's a 45-minute block. Sometimes it's 2 blocks, sometimes it's 1, depending on the number of minutes. But that is equal to what they're getting right now, right? So that light green matches what this building's light green's right now. It's the dark green that increases. The dark green are then opportunities for push-in enrichment in grade levels. Now we mocked up what grade levels they were. There's nothing magical about what that would be, because that depends on the building's schedule. But you can see that there is content time and then there is enrichment time for this person, this full-time body, to go in and do that. And what we talked about both with the teachers as well as the principals is we very often will have, you'll be sitting in a 4th grade classroom and the teacher's got these 4 kids who are just some serious science, go get 'em, right? Nerds, if I may use that word out loud, right? Yes, Dr. Dormer, go. but they're not gifted, right? So the question is, how do we enrich those kids? And because they don't have the label, and so this will provide the classroom teacher another resource to come in and help with that, right? Somebody who is trained in gifted education to be able to extend the education for these groups of students. It would also provide extra time for remediation on the other end. So that is what the schedule looks like. We also did this for the other building, that had the increased time. And in both cases, like I said, it did increase the availability for these students from that standpoint. We park there to make sure that from a clarification standpoint. Oh, I didn't talk about the money. The reason it saves is, let's remember I'm comparing it to our current budget. Our current budget allocated 4 staff members, and so we're only utilizing 2.6 of them. We did utilize 1 in the fall for special education. There was an extra need in special education that was not anticipated. So we took one of those 4 positions at the beginning of the year and used them at the elementary for a special ed need. So there were 3 positions still in the budget not being utilized. When you utilize 2.6 of them, the other 0.4, as well as a benefits package, because one of the teachers doesn't need, that 3rd teacher doesn't need benefits either, because they're already in the district. And so that's 0.4 of a teacher plus a benefits package, which is where that $50,000 comes from, in terms of actual savings. Now, that's savings over what is budgeted. That is not savings over what we will spend. Okay? So I just want to clarify what I mean by that, which is why I prefaced the way I did in terms of what I mean by savings to the budget. Any questions on this or the chart? Okay. All right, and then there are 2 pieces here, and if I do one of them in 5 minutes, we'll be good with the other one that I can call in Mr. Miller for. So as you know, sadly, Mr. Ferry is retiring. I mean, happy for him, but sad for us that Mr. Ferry, sorry. Strike that from the minutes, Mr. Ferry. That Mr. Ferry has announced that he will be retiring on March 29th. So we are in the position to be posting that. We did make some adjustments to the job description that are in your agenda. On board docs that we would ask you to consider that we will bring to the board for approval at your meeting at the end of the month. Primarily, these are increases in media design, graphic design, video design, which is just the change of how the media and the communication world has gone since the job description was designed and updated during Mr. Ferry's tenure in the district. as well as some website capability. I'm hopeful that the new person, we will be addressing website and the continuity between classroom websites and building websites and the district website. We're currently working off of a free Google site, and so Mr. Ferry does a wonderful job patching that together, but there are limited things that you can do with that. And so we'll be asking this person to consider what are our options, and we'll bring those options to the board, because if we do something other than free, it'll cost money. So we'll have to make a decision as to whether that's worth it or not. So we don't have to have that conversation today, but that is one of the things I'll be looking for, and you'll see in the job description the areas that were added. The areas that were taken out either are areas that are no longer an emphasis, or no longer done, or redundant. There were a couple times where it said, okay, the person will do the website. Then it said, the person will do the website and will be charged of da-da-da-da-da-da. Okay. The fact that the person's doing the website, we know they're doing all those things that are attached to that piece of it. We didn't feel like we had to spell them out. So that if 2 years from now there's something additional, it's still website, you're still responsible. We go from there. Any questions on the communications and public relations coordinator? The thought process is, as I budgeted, when I show you my total numbers, just to let you know where I went from a number standpoint. Some of that will have to do with experience and qualifications, right? If we find somebody who can do everything we're asking them to do, which will be a very difficult pull, it might cost a little extra money. And so I did actually budget a $10,000 increase, but if we find somebody who has, obviously Mr. Ferry had lots of experience, and so we might find somebody who doesn't have the experience and has a similar skill set, it could actually be a decrease or a cost neutral. But for the sake of budgeting, I budgeted a $10,000 increase because that is consistent with some of the positions in the county. The county positions are all over the place. Some are far more than this. Some are very, very part-time, and so it depends. Not every district has this position, and so it's a little hard to do apples to apples. But from that standpoint, that is where that cost neutral or $10,000 increase is factored in. The next piece has to do with safety, and there are two pieces to the recommendation, one that I can talk about and one that we'll call Mr. Miller in, because since I still have 2 more minutes. We're doing two pieces of this. One is to recommend the addition of 2 school police officers. 1 school police officer, and the job description is attached. You'll see that the job description has 2 different names on it. It says at the top, school police officer, director of security, and then it says school police officer. Because there will be 2 of them. They will both be school police officers as the recommendation. One of them will also have added administrative responsibilities as the director of security. So when you look at the job description, the front is what you call normal. On the back are the qualifications. There are 20 qualifications for the school police officer. There are then 5 additional qualifications for the director of security. The director of security would get an additional stipend on top of the school police officer for those extra responsibilities. And basically they would be in charge of security throughout the district, so they would coordinate schedules. They would be our liaison with the police department or liaison with juvenile probation. Some of those areas where a school resource officer, or in this case a school police officer, would function. The other recommendation is to hire an additional 5-hour part-time security guard. And this would be at the high school level. We currently have a schedule where there is 1 block of time where there are not 2 security guards on campus. With the way this campus is used from 6:30 a.m. to 10 p.m., and the fact that if you're having what I'd call an academic event, you're coming in this side, and if you're having an athletic event, you're coming in on the far other side, it is very difficult for one person to cover both ends of those for those evenings where we have things going on all over the building, which is lots of evenings. And so the hope is that with this, if this is approved, we would be able to provide a schedule where there is never fewer than 2 people on campus at any one time. Right, now this is separate from the school police officer. This is a part-time security guard. We have multiple security guards right now. Their job description wouldn't change. We would just hire an additional one. It also provides a couple hours of flexibility for when the school police officer is out of the building. One of the things that our hope of the school police officer is to have relationships with all of our buildings, because they would both respond in emergencies. We need them to know the buildings, we need them to know the kids, we need them to know the front office, the layout of the buildings. That requires them to go visit those buildings, maybe help with trainings when it's Alice or things like that. This would allow this part-time person to cover those hours so that the security guard responsibilities at the high school remain covered. The difference between a school police officer and a school resource officer, which is what was budgeted and discussed in the spring last year, is that the school police officer is our employee. And Mr. Miller will get into this a little deeper in terms of the legality of that, but they are not a Pennridge regional police officer that works in the high school. That is the model that Quakertown has, that is the model that Central Bucks has, where they have school resource officers. School police officers are district employees, which means their job descriptions can look a little different, even though their qualifications and training are the same. So they are certified police officers, and Mr. Miller will get into that. So they are police officers, they have their arresting powers, they have the ability to carry a firearm on campus, but they also will serve the responsibility of security guards, because hopefully we won't have an emergency every minute of every day, and that this person can do other things to interact with students and pieces like that. Right. So I'm going to try to call Mr. Miller in, see if he's available, ask him to just give an overview and answer any questions that you might have from a legal standpoint. Hi, Mr. Miller. It's David Bolton. How are you? Good. All right, I'm going to put you on speaker so that we can see how the board can hear you, all right? All right. Can you still hear me?
I can hear you. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
I can hear you.
I think we'll just ask you to use your outside voice, because I think sitting at the board table we're probably okay, but maybe the recordings as well as the people in the back. So we have you stretched as far as we can. So we appreciate you making this work tonight, Mr. Miller. If you would just give us an overview, I've talked briefly about school resource officer versus school police officer, but if you would just give us an overview of what that looks like, what the qualifications of the men or women would be, as well as their training.
The next level up is your school police officer. That's a law officer employed by the school district whose responsibilities, including work hours, are established by the school district. That's the language of the statute. And the school entity may either employ or contract with school police officers. The school police officer, before you enter into the duties of office, you have to take an oath, standardized, swear I will affirm, support, defend the Constitution, etc. They have to wear a shield. A school police officer is not an SRO. An SRO is an employee of a separate entity. The school police officer is the employee of the district. A school entity has to apply to the judge of the Court of Common Pleas of the county in which you are located to appoint a person or persons as the school board may designate to act as SPOs for the school entity. Upon application, the judge would sign an order which grants the SPO the power to arrest, the authority to issue citations for summary offenses, the authority to detain students until the arrival of local law enforcement or any combination thereof. And of course, if the district would hire an SPO, we would look for them to have all of the powers permitted to them under the statute. An SPO has the power under the statute to enforce order in school buildings, if authorized by the court, to exercise the same powers exercised under law and ordinance of the police of the municipality, and to issue summary citations. In other words, they have most of the important powers of a school resource officer or a regular police officer by order of court, but they must have it by order of court. Okay? SPOs who have been granted those powers have to have completed MOPEC training, that's the training for Municipal Police Officer Education and Training Commission, or the same kind of training that a municipal police officer has undergone, Act 120 training, or have graduated from the State Police Academy and been employed as a state trooper and separated from service in good standing. So those are school police officers. With respect to how long it would take to have a judge certify a school police officer, I suspect it's more than a day and probably less than 30 days. It requires a petition to Common Pleas Court where we would have to go in and have a judge at motions court approve an SPO and slide an order. It's not particularly complicated, but anytime you're talking about courts, judges, and lawyers, it takes more than a day. The last category of individuals is the school resource officer, the SRO. That's a law enforcement officer who's commissioned and employed by a law enforcement agency, whose duty station is located in the school entity, and whose stationing is established by an agreement between the law enforcement agency and the school entity, right? And so the school entity may confer certain powers on an SRO to assist in developing school policy, to develop and educate students, to address crime and violence issues, and so on and so forth. And you may engage in intergovernmental cooperation agreements with entities to provide SROs in the school districts, and those we've done a number of those circumstances. But what it comes down to is those are the three areas where you can by which you can provide security. Security guards cannot be given the power to arrest by order of the court, do not have the same level of training, even if they do have the same level of training, unless they are an approved school police officer falling under the terms of the statute with court approval. That's the entity that has the power to detain and provide summary offenses and provide take certain police actions. And of course, SROs who are serving law enforcement officers co-located in the school have all the powers of any law enforcement officer. That's pretty much how the world breaks down.
Mr. Miller, what are the annual requirements in terms of training, if anything, for an SPO versus an SRO versus a Pennridge Regional Police Officer?
If I heard you correctly, what's the annual requirements?
Yes. What type of training will this person or persons have to have annually?
They'll have to have the annual training required by MOPEC, which includes the updates that I think occur every 2 years, if I read the regulations appropriately, to have the continuing education that's the same kind of continuing education municipal police officers undergo.
Okay, so their training requirements would be the same as an SRO's training requirement if they were a Pennridge Regional Police Officer.
In order for them to be approved by a judge and authorized to carry a firearm and be an SPO, yes.
Okay, great. Do the board have any other questions clarifying?
Does that include the annual firearms certification, right? Is that in addition?
That also includes the annual firearm certification. I don't know if it's annual or not, but whatever the firearm certification is, that would be part of that as well?
Yes. Of course, if we're going to have anyone carry a firearm, they're going to be certified yearly.
Yearly, okay.
Any other questions from board members? Mr. Miller, what I'm going to suggest is that we not act on this at the February board meeting, but that we, again, just put it on the agenda as a discussion item for you to provide a brief synopsis just like you did, so that we give the community plenty of opportunity to hear this information and ask clarifying questions that they might have. I do know that there were conversations in this community about this issue last year, and the decision to put a school resource officer was there. So I know many of those conversations happened, but I just want to go slowly. So I'll just ask you that for the February board meeting, if you be ready again to say similar things that you just said, and we'll all act like it's the first time we're hearing it.
So just one comment before I sign off. I think that's wise. I know that we have just connected with the Department of Education, and they are within the next couple of weeks coming out with some further guidance on Act 44. But we have talked to them extensively about the materials that we've previously taught on, and it's my understanding that they see their view of what is required and permissible under Act 44 is very similar to what I just enunciated. So I'm happy to talk about that further, because I do believe that this is an area of the law that's fluid, and we want to make all the right choices and fully informed choices.
Okay. Any other clarifying questions from Mr. Miller?
I think that's entirely appropriate to have further discussion, because some of this in the spring, before Act 44 was enacted, or at least became operable, was done in the public view,
yes.
And some of it has been done in executive session because the Act allowed that, right?
Yes.
So I think the community isn't particularly aware, maybe some are, but many aren't, of this, what this means and what the decision may bring.
Yeah, I think to have as many opportunities for public comment.
Plus the fact, I think, your whole proposal tonight, obviously, is the first we've heard about the 2019-2020 budget, really, right? It's, in my opinion, sort of taken almost out of context in the sense that you don't, what else you're going to propose or not propose. And as you said, certainly there always is this decision about how many teachers we employ in the district based on decisions that students make and the number of students that enroll in any given year. So that has an effect on this too, but I do think that this is kind of the first step rather than the last step, so to speak. Right? So actually, I would like to see more of the budget before having to be being asked to make these decisions.
Okay. Anything else for Mr. Miller?
No.
Mike, thank you. We appreciate it.
Dr. Bolton, before I ring off, I just wanted to note it for the record, I am still wearing a bow tie right this minute. So I don't want to disappoint.
Is it green?
It happens to be green and pink. Thank you very much.
Then you get 2 points. Well done, Mike.
All right.
See ya.
See you. Bye.
Bye. He does have some sort of obsession. Okay. Same thing from a dollar standpoint as you look at the bottom, right? I did want to estimate out the cost in terms of 2 school police officers, with one of them being director of security, as well as the 5 hours of part-time security guard. And so the reason it says that costs $83,000, but then it says savings of $17,000, the current budget has $100,000 allocated for a school resource officer. So that's basing off of that money that's currently in the budget and not being spent. If we were to spend those dollars today, there would be a $17,000 savings to the budget. But it's not really a savings, but it is compared to this year's budget and the numbers that were there. It's not new money for next year is what I'm trying to say in terms of that piece. Okay? Mr. Rajan, and again, I'm sorry if I have your last name incorrectly. We've had lots of conversations about trainings, and I know that that was part of your public comment. Obviously, Mr. Miller talked a little bit about those types of things. There are at least 3 times a year school resource officer trainings that are provided for people who are doing these jobs for local police officers, and our SPO would be expected to go to at least one of those every year.
Right.
And that does provide some of the trainings that are unique to being in this setting. We would also look for what I would just, for the lack of a better term, some ed psychology trainings to make sure these people are aware of how do you handle a 17-year-old differently than maybe handling a 37-year-old at Brooklyn. You know, it is very different, like you said, and to make sure that they are reasonable but still within their roles, making sure they're maintaining order, as well as things like continuum of force. You know, that there are lots of things you do before you ramp up a situation. And all police officers go through those trainings. That's part of the MOPEC requirements that Mr. Miller referred to, as well as our security guards gaining some of those additional trainings as well. it's not appropriate for our security guards to go to an SRO training, but some of those ed psychology pieces, we've made the commitment and are talking about incorporating that for all of our security guards, so that when they're handling somebody who's having a bad day, how do you handle that and not escalate it, but still handle it, right? It's basically parenting 101, but for school security guards.
I mean, my brother's a police officer, just to, like, most of the times they're coming to the end of the situation. And what I'd like to know is, what's the school doing prior to the situation? Like, you know, outreaches. When you see kids in a, you know, not doing good, what are we doing to engage them to try to prevent something escalating to that level? I'm not saying don't get officers, I still think we need them, but there should be our last line versus outreach, getting kids engaged with other kids, getting them feel like part of the community so they're not isolated, they're not doing other stuff. So that also should be part of it.
So I appreciate that in terms of that.
I think it should be noted that all the security guards currently are former police officers.
I believe all but one. I think one of the new hires is not, if I remember that correctly, although I'm not positive. But you're right. The majority of our security guards, if not all of them,
So
are
presumably
actually...
they've had some of this training in the past,
Mhm.
not current, but in the past, right?
Correct. Okay. The last piece is just additional curriculum and teacher support areas. One is to look at our elective areas. Currently, we have elective area coordinators in areas like art and music and library, where they are full-time teachers, but they then provide support or are asked to provide curriculum and support. That is a very difficult task when you are teaching full-time. And almost all of them, all but one, are at the high school. And so if we have a new teacher at the elementary school, almost all of that support is done either electronically or after hours. What I've asked is that we consider where possible, because this may be possible or not depending on student choice, and we need to prioritize student classes, but where possible either utilizing their current teaching schedule or through the allotment of a 6th section where other people can choose to teach 6 classes. It's part of the collective bargaining agreement, that we look to provide where possible one additional period for those elective area coordinators. We would embed them where possible at the end of the day, so that there would be time for them to leave the high school and go to the middle school or the elementary school to actually be in the classroom with these teachers and to provide that support. It's similar to what the curriculum supervisors are doing, but on a smaller scale because there aren't as many of those teachers in each department, and they have full-time teaching responsibilities. And so that is what that piece is. That cost of $14,000 is budgeting for 6 sections. 6 sections is $3,500 in the new collective bargaining. And so we're anticipating that of the 6 coordinators I'm talking about, 4 of them, this might work. And that we have a 6th section, right? And so that's an estimate, but that's where I picked that in terms of that piece. Also, just informing you that one of the pieces we're doing with Dr. Scheid's oversight is assigning administrative liaisons for each department. Currently, if you think about the principal at, name any school you want, right? So the principal at South. Dr. McAllister has an expertise. Right? She has training, she has skill sets in terms of the back, and I actually don't know Dr. McAllister's, but let's say it's social studies. Well, for us to be able to assign her to help the social studies department on what I would call the district curriculum department days, because when you have K through 12 curriculum supervisors, they often have 3 different responsibilities going on in a staff development. They have something for the elementary school, something for the middle school, something for the high school students. And so Dr. Dormer is a perfect example. In those days, she'd have to be 3 different places at one time. And so she can bring them all to the same building and move around, right? And that's what they're currently doing. But to be able to then have other administrators who have at least a level of expertise in that, to be able to say, hey, can you be another set of eyes and ears and help me with the middle school who's working on curriculum? And here's what I want you to do, and I'll be over in an hour, right? But to keep them moving and to help support that process, to provide a little additional responsibility for current administrators within the area of curriculum. I think it also increases the buy-in from a curriculum standpoint when the building administrators are fully aware of what the teachers are doing and the curriculum departments are doing. They get that information right now, but in the busyness of the day, it might be sometimes hard to fully attend to that. And so if you're deeply involved, I do think that we'll benefit from that standpoint. Now, these savings numbers are here, our current year budget. So these are not, this does not mean all these proposals are $60,000 cheaper than if we didn't do them, okay? This is if you think about the money that was allocated this year for the 3 additional teachers and the SRO, and compare these recommendations with all of the changes, for the current year, if we were to do this instead of what was budgeted, it would be about $60,000 cheaper. All right, so that's what that number means. So when you look at additional recommendations, the additional recommendations would be new money. This is just money that's already in the budget. Now, that doesn't mean the board has to continue and keep that budget, but that is the dollar to dollar that I was comparing it off of. Which is why these recommendations were within the confines of what's currently happening, as opposed to what could be happening next year. That is more wagged by the students. Many of these things are determinations and recommendations of current moving around the deck chairs and pieces like that. Are there any questions on any of that? So from a standpoint of the conversations that we've had in the posting of positions, obviously the Director of Communications and Public Relations, that position has been posted. Right, we have a retirement, and so we are moving forward. From a standpoint of talking with Source for Teachers around the additional playground and lunchroom aids, those are pieces that can be accommodated in the current budget and our current job descriptions that we have, which means we are moving forward with the additional playground lunchroom aids for this year to see if we can get them in place as soon as possible. The other positions are things that we will continue to talk about and see what gets approved in terms of job descriptions in February, to be able to move forward or not with those positions from that standpoint. We will have to have a conversation. Let's assume that from an SPO standpoint that we get to March and we are ready to have a recommendation at the March board meeting, because that gives us the February board meeting and then committee meetings in March to have additional conversation. If we feel ready at March, if you feel ready at March, and we're going to act on that recommendation, the question would be, do we want to move forward immediately or do we wait? Right, because there is going to be a time delay to not only find the people, but then also get them through the court system. Mm-hmm. And so whether we do that, the question will be, when do we post? Do we post in April and then say it's at July 1? Do we post in April and hire as soon as possible? Because the current budget will obviously allow for some expenditures there, because there is that line item there. Mr. Delbert is comfortable with that. And so that is part of the conversation, the decision will need to be made, because it's not your normal teaching position that has that same rhythm. Right, there are summer responsibilities and some. One thing that I did mention from the SPO standpoint that is in the job description, beyond what I would call the normal security guard. The security guards currently work 181 days, and which is the number of student days. So they work student days. We are asking the Director of Security to work an additional 15 days, and so they would be primarily at the end of the school year or staff development days or at the beginning of the school year for trainings. So they would be developing trainings for staff, for students. They would supervise the ALIS trainings for our new teachers. And so there would be some extra days that would be built into there, so that wouldn't be extra pay. Currently, all of that's extra pay. If we have those people come in for any of those during the summer, we provide some supervision for the sports teams that come in. Not that we need to supervise them full-time, but there is that type of thing. As well as then the other school police officer, we would expect 10 additional days. And so that is in the job description. You'll see that one says 196 days and one says 191 days. And that is the difference between those two positions. That is in addition to what they're currently be doing as a security guard from that standpoint.
So if we were to hire them in the spring, or try to hire them in the spring, then they would have most of the summer off, correct?
Correct, they would, yes. We'd have to decide what trainings we need to develop the first time through, but yes. All right, that's it from a standpoint of recommendations.
All right, so the discussion at this point will move to the actual job descriptions, I believe, which is what remains on this item. So the first one is for the school police officers and the Director of Security, who is one of those two as in the proposal.